When I bought the land, I didn't think much of the HOA. To me, it was just a bunch of neighbors who wanted to make sure the lawns were mowed and the streets stayed clean. I had moved back to my hometown after years of working construction in another state, ready to build a home and settle into something slower, quieter, and simpler. The property I bought wasn't just any plot of land. It was a large, beautiful piece of acreage with rolling hills, big oak trees, and a small creek running along the back. I wanted space to breathe, space to work on my trucks, and room for my dogs to run around without bothering anyone. The real estate agent had mentioned that technically, the property was within the HOA boundary, but it was so far on the edge that no one had enforced any rules there for years. I figured that meant I'd be left alone. I couldn't have been more wrong. I first met Karen about a week after I moved in. I was outside unloading lumber from my truck, planning to start work on a big workshop I'd been dreaming about for years. She pulled up in her shiny silver SUV, rolled down the window, and called out to me. "Hi there," she said in a voice that was overly cheerful, the kind of tone that's just a little too sweet to be sincere. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked over, figuring she was just being neighborly. She introduced herself as the HOA president and immediately started telling me about the rules of the community. I listened politely, but something about her tone put me on edge. She wasn't just informing me, she was warning me. She pointed out that all structures must be approved by the HOA board, and that I'd need to submit formal plans before I could build anything. I told her my property was technically outside the regularly patrolled area and that the real estate agent said I wouldn't have any trouble. Her smile froze on her face, and I could tell she didn't like that answer. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my gate. It was from the HOA, citing me for unauthorized construction, even though I hadn't built a single thing yet. The letter claimed I was in violation of multiple codes and warned that fines would begin immediately if I didn't cease all activity. I was furious. I had lived there less than 2 weeks, hadn't done anything but unload some supplies, and I was already getting threats. I decided I wasn't going to roll over. I spent the next few days reading through the HOA bylaws, line by line, highlighting every section that applied to properties on the outskirts of the community. What I found made my blood boil. My property wasn't even legally under the HOA's control. The boundaries had been redrawn years ago, but apparently no one had bothered to update their own records. Legally, they had no authority over me at all. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Karen. A few days later, I came home to find her standing in my driveway with 2 other board members, all 3 of them holding clipboards like they were government inspectors. She told me they were there to document violations. I laughed in her face and told her to get off my property. She didn't take that well. She said I was creating an adversarial environment, and that she would have no choice but to take action if I didn't cooperate. The smugness in her voice made my blood boil. I told her again, very plainly, that she had no legal authority here, and if she set foot on my property again, I'd call the sheriff. She stormed off, muttering under her breath about how I'd regret this. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Karen started harassing me in every way she could think of. She called the county building inspector on me, claiming I was illegally grading land. She called animal control, saying my dogs were dangerous, even though they'd never left my property. She even tried to get the local power company to shut off my service, claiming I was tampering with utilities. Every time she pulled one of these stunts, I had to waste hours on the phone proving my innocence. It became obvious that she was trying to wear me down, to make me give up and leave. But I'm not the type to back down from a fight. If she wanted a war, I was ready to give her one. One evening, after another long day of dealing with her nonsense, I sat on my porch with a cold beer and thought about what I was going to do. I realized that as much as I hated dealing with the HOA, they weren't all like her. The few neighbors I had spoken to seemed like decent people. They complained about Karen just as much as I did. One guy told me she once tried to fine him for leaving his garbage cans out for an extra hour. Another neighbor said she tried to stop his daughter from setting up a lemonade stand because it was an unlicensed business. It hit me then, Karen wasn't just my problem, she was everyone's problem. If I could get the rest of the community on my side, I wouldn't just be defending myself, I could take her down completely. So I started talking to people. Whenever I saw a neighbor out walking their dog or mowing their lawn, I'd stop and chat. I'd ask about their experiences with the HOA and with Karen. What I heard over and over again was frustration and resentment. People were tired of her constant power trips, the endless fines, and the petty rules. I started compiling stories, keeping notes about every unfair thing she'd done. I collected copies of letters she'd sent, pictures of things she claimed were violations, and even recordings of conversations where she threatened people. It didn't take long before I had a whole file full of evidence, not just that she was a bully, but that she was abusing her power as HOA president. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I was ready. I walked into that meeting with a folder under my arm and a fire in my gut. Karen looked shocked to see me there, she clearly didn't expect me to show up. I waited until the open forum portion of the meeting and then stood up. Calmly, clearly, and with as much control as I could muster, I laid out everything I had gathered. I explained how she had targeted me without legal standing, how she had harassed multiple neighbors, and how she was costing the HOA money with all her frivolous enforcement actions. I could see the other board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I could see the neighbors nodding along. By the time I finished, the room was dead silent, and Karen's face was bright red. That night was the turning point. The neighbors rallied behind me, and suddenly Karen wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting the whole community. After that HOA meeting, it was like a switch had been flipped in the neighborhood. For the first time, I wasn't the outsider, I was the guy standing up to Karen when everyone else had been too scared to. Neighbors I hadn't even met before started stopping by my place to thank me for what I'd done. One older man named Bill came over the next morning with a stack of old HOA newsletters. He told me he'd been saving them for years because he knew something wasn't right with how Karen was running things. The newsletters were full of questionable fines, suspicious budget adjustments, and rule changes that hadn't been voted on properly. It was a goldmine. I spent the next few days going through those newsletters and comparing them to the HOA bylaws I had already studied. The more I looked, the more I realized just how far Karen had gone. She wasn't just petty, she was corrupt. She had used HOA funds to pay for landscaping at her own house. She had pushed through rule changes that allowed her to impose higher fines without majority approval. She had even quietly increased her own HOA president stipend, something most of the community didn't even know existed. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to not only get her removed but potentially sued. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. 2 days after the meeting, I woke up to find "Notice of Lien" signs staked all along my fence line. She had filed a fake lien against my property, claiming I owed thousands in unpaid HOA dues. My stomach sank. I knew it wasn't legal, but I also knew it could create a nightmare for me if I ever wanted to sell my land. I called the county clerk's office, and sure enough, she had submitted the paperwork under her own name without board approval. The clerk told me they'd seen her do this before, but no one had ever officially challenged it. That was about to change. I hired a lawyer the same day. I didn't want to. I hated the idea of spending money just to defend myself from something I shouldn't have to deal with, but I knew if I let this slide, she'd never stop. My lawyer was a sharp guy named Chris who had dealt with nightmare HOAs before. When I showed him everything I'd collected, he smiled and said, "This is more than enough to take her down." He immediately filed a motion to have the lien removed and sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA demanding they stop harassing me. Karen must have gotten the letter within a day, because that evening, she showed up at my driveway screaming at me about how I was destroying the community. I stood there calmly, arms crossed, and told her that from now on, she could talk to my lawyer. Watching her stomp back to her car was the most satisfying thing I'd seen in weeks. But Karen wasn't just targeting me anymore, she started lashing out at everyone. She sent violation notices to half the neighborhood, citing ridiculous things like improper mailbox height and unapproved flower bed colors. Instead of intimidating people, though, it just made them angrier. My neighbor Emily, who had always been quiet and polite, marched over to my place with a copy of her notice in hand and said, "I'm done with her. What do we do next?" That was when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore, it was an uprising. I organized a meeting at my place the following weekend. More than 20 neighbors showed up, cramming into my unfinished workshop and spilling out onto the porch. I laid out everything I had found, the misuse of funds, the illegal fines, the power grabs. People were shocked, but also fired up. We decided right then that we were going to call for a special election to remove Karen and replace the board. According to the bylaws, we only needed a certain percentage of homeowners to sign a petition to force the election, and by the end of the night, we had more than enough signatures. When Karen found out what we were doing, she completely lost it. She started sending threatening emails to everyone who had signed the petition, accusing us of sabotaging the community, and warning that we'd be held legally liable if property values dropped. My lawyer assured everyone that she was bluffing, but a few neighbors still got scared and tried to back out. That's when I started making personal visits, going door to door, explaining that if we didn't get rid of her now, she'd just keep getting worse. Slowly, we built back the support we needed. The night of the special election was tense. The meeting was held in the community center, and you could feel the tension in the air as people filed in. Karen sat at the head of the table, glaring at me like she wished she could set me on fire with her eyes. The vote was supposed to be secret, but she kept trying to intimidate people, asking them loudly how they planned to vote. Chris, my lawyer, was there too, and he made sure everything was done by the book. When the votes were counted, the result was overwhelming. Karen was out. She tried to argue, saying the petition was invalid, the votes were rigged, anything she could think of, but no one was listening. The rest of the board, clearly tired of her antics, voted to replace her on the spot. That should have been the end of it, but Karen wasn't about to walk away quietly. The very next day, she posted a long rant on the neighborhood Facebook page, calling me a bully and claiming that I had stolen the HOA from her. She accused me of plotting to ruin the community with my illegal construction, and even claimed I had intimidated elderly neighbors into voting against her. Most people ignored her, but a few of her loyal supporters started causing trouble. I woke up one morning to find my mailbox smashed and spray paint on my front gate that said, "Go home." That was when I realized Karen wasn't just angry, she was dangerous. I installed cameras around my property and started documenting everything. Anytime someone came onto my land, anytime I got a suspicious letter or phone call, I recorded it. Chris told me to keep everything because if Karen escalated, we'd need proof. Sure enough, within a week, I caught one of her supporters sneaking onto my property at night and trying to slash my truck tires. The footage was crystal clear, and when I handed it over to the sheriff, they didn't waste any time making an arrest. That arrest was the last straw for most of the neighborhood. People were horrified that it had gotten to this point. Even the few neighbors who had been on Karen's side started distancing themselves from her. The new HOA board officially banned her from attending meetings for harassing other members, and she was fined for vandalism and trespassing. For the first time since I had moved in, things started to feel normal again. But I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her don't just give up, they plot. And I was ready for whatever came next. For a couple of weeks after the special election, it seemed like Karen had finally been forced into silence. The neighborhood was quieter, people were friendlier, and the new HOA board was actually reasonable to work with. We had meetings about repairing the cracked sidewalks, improving the street lighting, and even setting up a neighborhood watch to keep everyone safe. But in the back of my mind, I knew it was just the calm before the storm. Karen wasn't the kind of person to let go of control easily, and sure enough, she came back with a vengeance. It started with little things, nasty notes left in my mailbox, anonymous complaints to the county about excessive noise coming from my property, even though all I'd been doing was using power tools during normal daylight hours. Then I started noticing a black SUV parked down the road, watching my house. The first time I saw it, I figured it was a coincidence. The second and third time, I knew it wasn't. I wrote down the license plate number and called the sheriff. They told me it was registered to a private investigator. That was when I realized Karen had actually hired someone to dig up dirt on me. Instead of panicking, I decided to get proactive. I started digging deeper into Karen's past. With the help of some neighbors who worked in real estate and public records, we uncovered some very interesting information. Karen had a history of filing lawsuits, not just here, but in 2 other states. She had sued former neighbors for violating HOA standards, and she had even been sued herself for harassment once but settled out of court. We also discovered that she had been delinquent on her own property taxes a few years back, and the HOA had quietly covered the shortfall using community funds, which she had conveniently never paid back. I decided it was time to go public. At the next HOA meeting, I stood up and presented everything I had found. The new board was stunned, and the neighbors were furious. Karen, who had snuck into the meeting despite being banned, tried to shout me down, but no one was listening to her anymore. People were demanding that she pay back the money she had taken from the HOA and threatening to take her to court if she didn't. Karen stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the room shook. That night, I knew she'd try to retaliate, and she did. Around midnight, my security cameras caught someone throwing a bag of nails across my driveway. It was amateurish and desperate, but it was enough to blow out the tire on my truck the next morning. I sent the footage straight to the sheriff, and they opened another case. The deputy told me privately that they had been getting more and more complaints about Karen from other neighbors, including one family who claimed she was leaving threatening letters on their porch. The community was fed up, and we decided to escalate. Chris helped us draft a formal lawsuit against Karen for harassment, defamation, and misuse of HOA funds. Several neighbors joined as co-plaintiffs. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about holding her accountable for everything she had done to everyone. When Karen was served with the lawsuit, she went ballistic. She started posting rants online almost every day, accusing us of running a witch hunt and claiming we were ruining her life. Ironically, the more she posted, the worse she made herself look. But Karen wasn't completely stupid. She tried one last big move to save herself. She contacted the county zoning office and claimed that my workshop was violating building codes. She even sent them fake photos that made it look like I was dumping waste into the creek behind my house. Luckily, I had time-stamped security footage proving that her photos were doctored, and when the county inspector came out, he actually apologized to me for wasting my time. When I showed him the footage of Karen sneaking around my property taking pictures, he added it to his report. The new HOA board called an emergency meeting and voted to permanently ban Karen from holding any position in the association. They also voted to pursue their own legal action against her for embezzling funds and creating fraudulent liens. Watching her face as she received the official letter from the HOA attorney was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. But I wasn't done. I knew Karen still had a few loyal supporters, and I didn't want this fight dragging on forever. So I decided to take things one step further. I started a neighborhood newsletter. Every month, I sent out a simple, factual update about what was happening in the community, repairs being made, upcoming events, and yes, updates about the ongoing lawsuit against Karen. I kept everything professional, but I made sure everyone knew exactly how much money had been recovered from Karen and how much had been saved by ending her endless fines. Slowly but surely, the entire neighborhood turned against her. Karen's supporters dwindled until she was completely isolated. People stopped talking to her, stopped waving when she drove by, and some even stopped letting their kids play near her house. Her once perfectly manicured lawns started to go brown, her flower beds overgrown. It was like the entire neighborhood had decided to shut her out. And that was exactly what I wanted. One night, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I realized just how far things had come. When I first moved in, I just wanted to be left alone, to build my shop and enjoy my land in peace. But now, I had become something else entirely, a leader in the community, someone people came to for advice and help. And in the process, I had taken everything away from Karen, her power, her influence, and her ability to terrorize anyone ever again. But deep down, I had a feeling she wasn't done just yet. Karen was the kind of person who thrived on drama, and I knew she'd try to find some way to get back at me one last time. What I didn't know was that her final move would push things further than I ever expected, and it would lead to a showdown that no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. Just when I thought things were finally quieting down, Karen made her most outrageous move yet. I woke up one morning to find a notice taped to my front gate, not from the HOA, not from the county, but from a law firm representing Karen personally. She was suing me for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of reputation. She claimed that my actions had caused her to suffer severe psychological harm, had destroyed her standing in the community, and had made her home value plummet. I couldn't believe what I was reading. She had spent months harassing me, sabotaging my property, and spreading lies about me, and now she was playing the victim. Chris, my lawyer, took one look at the lawsuit and laughed. "This is desperate," he said, flipping through the pages. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on, and honestly, this might just end up helping us." He explained that by filing this suit, Karen had opened herself up to discovery, which meant we could dig even deeper into her finances, her communications, and her history. I grinned at that. if Karen wanted to play legal hardball, we were going to play it better. We filed a countersuit almost immediately, not just for harassment and defamation, but also for malicious prosecution. The discovery process was brutal, for her. We subpoenaed her emails, her text messages, and her bank statements. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Karen had been secretly using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses for years. Landscaping, house painting, even a vacation to Florida, all billed to the Community Improvement Fund. There were also emails where she bragged to her friends about making that new guy's life hell and saying she'd drive him out no matter what it takes. When this evidence came to light, it didn't just destroy her case, it turned it completely against her. Our lawyer filed a motion to have her lawsuit thrown out and to seek punitive damages for her abuse of the legal system. The judge scheduled a hearing, and when the day came, the courtroom was packed. Half the neighborhood showed up to watch. Karen sat there looking pale, clutching a stack of papers and whispering frantically to her attorney. When it was our turn to present, Chris was ruthless. He laid out every piece of evidence, the embezzlement, the doctored photos, the harassment, the vandalism. He played the recordings of Karen threatening neighbors and showed the judge the video of her supporters slashing my tires. By the time he was done, you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom. Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she had been set up, but no one believed her. The judge dismissed her lawsuit on the spot and ruled that she was liable for our legal fees. He also referred the embezzlement evidence to the county prosecutor for potential criminal charges. Karen's face went white when she heard that. She stood up and shouted that the whole system was corrupt, that I had bribed everyone, and that she would never stop fighting. The bailiff had to escort her out of the courtroom. As I sat there watching her go, I felt a mix of satisfaction and relief, but also something else. Pity. As much as I hated what she had done to me, it was clear she was spiraling out of control, consumed by the very power she had lost. But Karen wasn't done. A few days later, I got a visit from the sheriff. He told me Karen had filed a police report claiming I had been stalking her and trespassing on her property. Luckily, my cameras and alibis proved I hadn't been anywhere near her house. In fact, my cameras showed her driving past my place multiple times a day, slowly, as if she was the one stalking me. The sheriff warned her to back off, and this time, he told me, if she comes near your property again, we'll charge her with harassment. Despite everything, Karen still had one last card to play. She contacted the local news, trying to spin the story in her favor. A reporter actually showed up at my place, asking for my side of the story. I handed over the same evidence we had used in court, and to my surprise, the reporter agreed to run a balanced piece. When the story aired, it painted Karen as the aggressor and highlighted how the entire community had banded together to remove her. The next day, the clip went viral locally. People from outside the neighborhood started leaving comments supporting us and condemning Karen's actions. That was the moment I knew she was finished. Whatever power she thought she still had was gone. The new HOA board officially barred her from attending any neighborhood events. Her remaining supporters stopped defending her online. Even her own family, I later learned, had started urging her to move away and start fresh somewhere else. But before she could do that, the criminal case caught up to her. The county prosecutor filed charges for fraud and misuse of community funds. Karen was arrested and booked. When the news broke, the neighborhood exploded with relief. People were cheering, literally cheering, in the streets. I stood on my porch that night, listening to the distant sound of celebration, and felt something I hadn't felt since I first moved here: peace. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly the neighborhood started healing. The tension that had been hanging over us for months lifted. People started organizing block parties, kids rode their bikes without fear of being yelled at, and neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years started talking again. My workshop was finally finished, and on the day I moved my tools in, half the neighborhood came over to help me celebrate. But as much as we had won, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's shadow still lingered. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was just the memory of how bad things had gotten, but I kept my cameras up and stayed cautious. I wasn't going to let anything like that happen to me, or to this neighborhood, ever again. Karen's arrest marked the end of a long, bitter chapter for the neighborhood, but it also marked the beginning of something new. In the weeks that followed, the community felt different, lighter, freer. People who had spent years quietly putting up with Karen's rules suddenly came out of the woodwork to get involved. The HOA meetings, which had once been tense and hostile, turned into productive discussions. Instead of focusing on fines and punishments, the new board started talking about improvements, fixing the park benches, adding more lighting to the walking trail, and even putting in a community garden. I wasn't planning to get deeply involved at first. All I wanted was my peace and quiet. But the new HOA president, a level-headed guy named Mark, asked if I'd consider running for a board seat. "You were the one who stood up when no one else would," he told me. "You helped all of us. We could use that kind of voice here." I thought about it for a while before agreeing. After everything we had been through, I realized that walking away would be a mistake. If we wanted to make sure another Karen never rose to power again, we needed to keep the HOA accountable. So I ran for the seat, and won easily. It felt strange sitting at that same table where Karen had once ruled with an iron fist, but this time, it felt right. My first order of business was to push for transparency. We created a new policy requiring every board decision to be posted publicly, along with how funds were being spent. We also eliminated the arbitrary fines Karen had been so fond of handing out and replaced them with a system focused on communication first, enforcement second. Almost overnight, the relationship between the HOA and the neighbors changed. But not everyone was ready to forgive and forget. Karen's house sat empty for a while after she was arrested. The bank eventually foreclosed on it when she failed to pay her mortgage, and it went up for auction. A young couple with 2 kids bought it, and on the day they moved in, half the neighborhood came out to welcome them. It felt symbolic, the last trace of Karen's reign being wiped clean, replaced with something new and hopeful. As for Karen herself, she eventually took a plea deal. She avoided jail time but was ordered to pay back every dollar she had stolen from the HOA, plus fines and restitution for the damage she had caused. The judge also issued a restraining order keeping her from contacting me or any of the other plaintiffs ever again. Last I heard, she sold what little she had left and moved several towns away. Part of me was glad she was gone, but another part of me felt a strange sense of closure. She had been my greatest enemy, but without her, none of this change would have happened. Over time, I became more than just a board member, I became someone people trusted to make things right. Neighbors came to me when they had disputes, when they wanted to propose projects, or when they just needed advice. I helped organize a block party that summer, the first the neighborhood had ever had. We had barbecue, games for the kids, and even a local band came out to play. People laughed together, ate together, and for the first time since I had moved in, it really felt like a community. One evening, as I sat in my workshop with the big doors open, watching the sun set over the creek, I thought back to how all of this started. When I first moved here, all I wanted was a quiet place to live, somewhere I could build and work with my hands without anyone bothering me. Instead, I had been thrown into the middle of a war, one I never asked for but refused to lose. And in fighting that war, I had done more than just protect my land. I had helped change an entire neighborhood for the better. Looking back, I realized that the whole experience had changed me too. I was no longer just the guy on the edge of town who wanted to be left alone. I had become someone who cared about the people around me, someone who took pride in where I lived. And most importantly, I had learned that sometimes, standing up to a bully doesn't just save you, it inspires everyone else to stand up too. That night, I cracked open a cold beer, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the faint sound of kids playing down the street. The air was calm, peaceful, and still. No Karen. No threats. No drama. Just the sound of a neighborhood that had finally found its balance. And as I sat there under the wide, starry sky, I knew that no matter what came next, this place, my land, my home, was finally everything I had fought for it to be.